In my last review video, Photos by Mackin posted a comment asking for a comparison of the Sigma 16-300mm to the Sony 70-350mm, and I said that if that comment got 50 likes, I would do it. Well, it got a bunch of likes, and here we are. And this is somewhat of an unconventional review. We have a new Sigma 16-300 that is a compact do-everything zoom lens that I'm comparing to, I would say, a dedicated telephoto zoom. Both are APS-C lenses, but one can be used as your only lens, whereas the other would require another zoom to really fill in the wide end, something from 16 all the way up to that 70mm. Both of these lenses are rented. I'm going to do a comparison and give you my thoughts, so let's begin. Let's start by taking a look at both of these lenses. The Sigma is smaller, about an inch shorter overall. However, they weigh within 10 grams of each other, so the Sigma, being more compact, feels more dense. The finish and the materials on the Sigma are better. The rubberized zoom ring is nicer to turn. The plastics feel superior in the hand. The Sony has more buttons and switches, an autofocus manual focus switch, an OSS or optical steady shot switch, a focus hold button, and a zoom lock switch, whereas the Sigma only has a zoom lock switch. Both lenses are weather resistant. The Sigma is made in Japan, the Sony is made in China. When it comes to aperture, both lenses are variable, but I made a little chart to show you guys where these lenses stand. In short, the Sony is brighter throughout most of the range. However, from about 210mm to about 290mm, both lenses are at f6.3. The Sigma only becomes an f6.7 towards the last 10mm of the zoom range, and these are all estimated values based on markings on the side of these lenses, so they can be off by 5 to 10 millimeters, but it's nice to get an idea of brightness. Both lenses have built-in stabilization. The Sigma claims 6 stops at the wide end and 4.5 stops at the telephoto end. The Sony doesn't have a specific release spec, but the general consensus is that it provides about 3 stops of stabilization through the entire range. And someone recently commented about stops of stabilization. What this means is that the lens allows you to take sharp handheld photos at roughly 3 stops slower shutter speed. So if you needed to shoot at 1/125 to get a sharp photo with the stabilization, you could shoot at 1/15, and this is huge for low light work as these lenses aren't bright, but with the stabilization, that allows you to really get some sharp photos even in darker situations. All right, let's check out these side-by-side shots between these two lenses. All of these samples and all of the videos that you are about to see are coming from my A6100, so no in-body stabilization, which makes this more of a fair comparison, I think. I'm going to keep all of the Sigma images on the left and all of the Sony images on the right, and just to give you guys an idea, this is how much wider roughly you can get with a Sigma versus that Sony. So you get quite a bit of wide end range. The lenses really are not comparable from that standpoint, but let's start at 70mm and let's compare these two. So we were out house shopping and I snapped a couple of these photos. I'm totally joking about that, but let's take a look at these. Both of these are wide open, so f5.6 on the Sigma, f4.5 on the Sony. So in theory, the Sigma should be sharper. It looks like the Sony is the sharper lens out of the two, and especially going into the corners, take a look at the difference here. This tree, a lot more detail with the Sony. All the little tiles. The center of the frame with these two, you can see are pretty close, but I'd still say that the Sony is sharper overall. The Sigma looks a little bit softer, and as you move out into the edges, I mean, take a look at the details in the trees and in this detached guest house. The next shot here is roughly at 300mm on the Sigma and 321 for some reason. A little bit closer on that Sony. So let's take a look at this in the center of the frame. Well, we have the opposite happening here. The Sony is looking quite soft. The Sigma is looking sharper, but with a lot more chromatic aberration. So I think this was a misfocused shot. I grabbed another one here. For some reason, the Sony is not focused properly, so we'll skip that one. So these were both shot all the way zoomed in, so 300mm versus 350, and you can see 6.7 versus 6.3. And I tried to keep the focus the exact same, but you can tell right away that the detail on the Sony is a bit better. Noticeable amount more detailed, and that only gets more exaggerated as you move to the edges and the corners. So that is a definite win for the Sony on the super telephoto side. Now on the wide end, let's take a look at this same subject really. And you can see even at 70mm on both 4.5 versus 5.6, in theory, the Sigma should be sharper, but it isn't. The Sony is the one that's resolving more details. It's just looks cleaner. The colors also look absurdly warm compared to the Sony's more natural colors. So I'd say that's a win on the Sony side. All right, here is another house here at 70mm. Again, 4.5 versus 5.6. In theory, the Sigma should be sharper. And here in the center of the frame, it looks pretty close. Chromatic aberration you can see popping up here, but there is a little bit of it as well on the Sony. But as soon as you get out into the edges, again, the Sigma should be sharper here at f5.6. I'm focusing on the exact same point. It doesn't make sense to me that at f4.5, the Sony is the sharper lens if the focal plane is even more narrow, and that applies to both edges of the frame. Just a lot more sharpness, a lot more detail resolved with the Sony telephoto lens. So here we have both at roughly 300mm. I undershot the one on the Sony, but let's zoom in, and here you see again more of the same. Sharpness in the center is pretty close. I'd still say that the Sony is a little bit better. As you move out into the edges, that difference starts to make a larger appearance. Both lenses have chromatic aberration. We'll get into that here shortly, but across the frame, the Sony is the sharper lens out of the two when you are comparing the telephoto side and the wider end. Here is a portrait of my wife, and you'll see the difference in color temperature here. So here's the Sigma and here's the Sony. Quite a bit warmer on the Sigma, nice and a little bit more neutral on the Sony. And then let's take a look at sharpness. Overall, this is zoomed in at 150% again. The Sony is sharper here. We're at 127mm, 140 on the Sigma, and it looks nice and sharp here. The Sigma is a little bit softer. And what's interesting here is if we take a look at the bokeh. Now, neither lens is really blowing me away in terms of bokeh. These are not bokeh monster lenses, but if you look at the bokeh, you'll see that the Sony's bokeh is a bit smoother. You have some onion rings and a little bit of the cat eye effect already with the Sigma lens. These seem to be a little bit more round, but they are getting worse. That being said, I do have to say at f6.3 and at the exact same shutter speed, same ISO settings, the bokeh on the Sony looks smoother overall. Now, in terms of flare performance, you see that there is a little bit of a difference here. I found that the Sony actually flared quite a bit more. There's more green and kind of orange elements to it and some rainbow artifacting. The flare control on the Sigma is pretty impressive. That being said, if you look at the chromatic aberration, you'll see that the Sigma tends to get a little bit more purple, whereas the Sony tends to get a little bit more green, at least in these two comparison shots. If you're zooming into 300mm, you'll see more of the same really. So a lot more purple tint with the Sigma, whereas with the Sony you get a little bit more green fringing. Yeah, I mean, you can see that pretty clearly here. Green, purple, purple, green. Here is another video demonstrating the flare performance of the Sigma 18-300mm. And here is the video from the Sony 70-350. Both of these are at 70mm. Okay, so if I were to summarize, sharpness in the center of the frame is about equal between these two lenses. In the corners, the Sony really beats the Sigma at every comparable focal length in the edges and in the corners, I should say. The bokeh is a little smoother on the Sony as well. The Sigma is a little bit warmer in color. It has better flare performance, and both lenses really have problems with chromatic aberration. But the story really doesn't end there. Let's talk about stabilization. I took some videos handheld at 70mm with both lenses, and the footage coming out of the Sigma was more stable. This is on a windy day, and you can see that there is more up and down movement with the Sony. Now zoomed in at 300mm, you'll see that there is a big difference in stabilization as well. The Sigma is impressively smooth for being a handheld shot at 300mm. This is equivalent to a full frame 450mm field of view handheld. The OS system really is quite remarkable on this Sigma compared to the Sony, which I'd say it's just fine. There is a bit more motion with the OSS system on the Sony, and these tests are strictly using the built-in lens stabilization. No camera stabilization was turned on or used because my a6100 does not have any of that. In terms of focus breathing, the Sigma has almost no focus breathing whatsoever, whereas the Sony has a little bit. Not much, but there is more than what you get with the Sigma. Now, as far as autofocus, I was expecting the Sony lens to be noticeably better, but to my surprise, both lenses perform nearly identically in every situation. Subject tracking was so close, it may have come from the exact same lens. They both lost focus on my son at the exact same time and regained focus at nearly the exact same point. If anything, it was the Sony that had 2 photos in those comparisons that were misfocused. The Sigma really has had no autofocus issues whatsoever in any of my testing. Then I have to bring up macro capabilities. With the Sony, you can focus up to 3.61 feet from your subject. With the Sigma, you can focus up to 0.56 feet. So a whopping 3 feet closer. And this difference is staggering. This is as close as I could get to photographing a Swiss Army knife with the Sony. And here's how close I can get with the Sigma. Here is my microphone with the Sony, as close as I could get. And here it is with the Sigma. The Sigma is a useful near macro lens in this regard. If you want to capture small details with your telephoto lens, really, the Sigma wins. Then you get down to the price. The Sony is $1,000 US. It's been out for a few years, so you can snag it up for a little bit less on the used market, but brand new, it's $1,000, and you still have to have some money left over to cover you from 16mm out to 70, because you'll likely need those focal lengths covered on your APS-C camera. The Sigma, on the other hand, is a one lens solution that is $699 US, so $300 less. You don't have to buy another lens to cover yourself on the wide end. So as usual, when it comes to comparison shopping lenses, there are some compromises. If you don't mind the softer corners and edges, the busier bokeh, and the purple color fringing, the Sigma is the best all-in-one lens out there on the market for your APS-C camera, at least today. You get great autofocus, excellent stabilization, no focus breathing really, and some macro capabilities all in a compact package. If, however, you want sharper images across the frame, smoother bokeh, and you don't mind carrying around a separate telephoto lens, the Sony really is a stellar performer. But let me know what you guys think about these two lenses down in the comment section below. Which was your favorite? If you had to pick one, which one would it be? If you are shopping for one of these, I will leave some links down below so you can check out prices, shop prices, maybe pick up a used one of these on Amazon for a nice little discount. You never know. So check those out. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more and have a nice day. Bye-bye.